We started these lectures from basics in obs and gynae. So in last lecture, we covered internal, external generative organs. And Dr. Vinita Gupta is with us today. And she will speak on the maternal physiology. She is a senior specialist and associate professor in Babasaheb Ambedkar Medical College of Delhi. She has done her MBBS from prestigious Lady Hardinge Medical College, Delhi, and her MD from Kasturi Medical College and Delhi University. Dr. Vinita is also a regular National Board of Examination faculty, examiner, assessor, and she is a national trainer for medical legal examination of sexual assault survivor for doctors, judiciary, and police. And she's also a national skill lab and Daksh lab trainer. She is chairperson of PCPNDT Committee of Northwest Delhi and received CM Award for work excellence in cover care. Presently, she is a senior specialist and associate professor in BSA Medical College. Over to you, Dr. Vinita. She will speak on maternal physiological changes.
Thank you, Shashi, for such a nice introduction. Very good evening and a very warm welcome to all my dear colleagues and respected sir. Maybe I don't know your name, sir, but I'll come to know and welcome all the students. I can see very less students, Abhi, but I hope that more will join soon. Shashi, you want us to wait for some more time? Or is it okay? Should I start?
I think the Anbai officials will be able to say, I think it is time to start.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
I would concur with Dr. Shashi, ma'am, because, ma'am, this is being recorded and it will be put in all our groups and on the website also, ma'am. So the students will get immensely benefited, ma'am. You may go ahead, madam, please.
Yes, Dr. Vinita, you can start.
Sure, sir, sure. So my slides are visible. I'll ask once again. Are they visible?
Okay, yeah, they are visible. You please press that button, slideshow button. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just do it again.
Yes.
Okay.
That's perfectly fine.
So once again, I greet and I welcome all my colleagues and my friends and my students. And since this is my very first presentation on this platform, so I just hope that I'll be able to do the justice. See, the normal pregnancy of 9 months duration poses a tremendous challenge on the maternal organ system. To meet the demands of the growing fetus, almost all organ systems are affected. There are hormonal changes, there are anatomical changes, physiological changes, and there are metabolic changes. It is very, very important to understand these changes because the interpretation of these changes will help us in understanding or abnormal pathologies during the pregnancy. See, another very important fact about these changes in pregnancies is that, and I also very good thing that these changes are temporary. Most of these changes revert back to normal almost by the end of 6 weeks in the postpartum period, and 50% of the changes are normal by the end of 2nd week. So basically these changes are temporary, but yes, they are very, very important, and it is very important to understand what are these changes. Now, another thing I would like to share with you is that these changes are, see, it is not possible to discuss all the changes, the hormonal changes, the anatomical, physiological, and the metabolic changes in one session. So I have split the session in 2 classes. Today, I'll be talking about the anatomical changes and the physiological changes. In another session on 27th of July, I'll be talking about the hormonal aspects and the metabolic changes which occur during pregnancy. And so without wasting any more time, let us start with the presentation. So first I'll be talking about changes in the genital organs. There are changes in the uterus, the cervix, ovary, vagina, and fallopian tubes. So let us talk each one by one. So the physiological changes, they occur in the cardiovascular system, hematological system, respiratory system, renal system, nervous system, and gastrointestinal system. So no organ is spared from the changes. Now let us talk one by one each of these changes. So what happens in the uterus? In the non-pregnant state, the uterus weighs approximately 70 grams with a cavity of 5 to 10 ml in size, and the size of 7.5 centimeter in length. But at term, the weight of the uterus becomes almost 1 kilograms, 1100 grams, and it measures 35 centimeter in length with a cavity size of 5 liters, which may increase as much as 20 liters depending upon the type of gestation. That is, in multiple gestation, in polyhydramnios, the size of the uterus, the cavity size may be as much as 20 liters. Then a little about the shape. See, the normal uterus, the non-pregnant uterus is piriform shaped. And this shape is maintained in the early weeks of gestation because initially there is increase or there is a change in the size from in the anteroposterior diameter. So there is only anteroposterior increase, whereas the lateral dimensions and the vertical dimensions remain same. So the piriform shape of the uterus is maintained. But later on, there is increase in the dimensions in all sides. That is, there is anteroposterior increase, there is lateral increase, and there is a vertical increase. So the size becomes, the shape of the uterus becomes globular by the end of 12 weeks. Subsequently, the uterus grows more rapidly in length than in width, and it becomes ovoid. And it becomes a abdominal organ. So by the end of 12th week, it is still a pelvic organ, but then subsequently it becomes a abdominal organ, which can be measured on the per abdomen examination while you are doing an obstetric examination. So that will be discussed in another classes on the examination of the normal pregnant ANC women. There's an increase in the growth and enlargement of the body of uterus, and there's a change in the muscle mass. Now, what happens to this muscle? First, there is hypertrophy and hyperplasia. It occurs under the influence of hormones, that is estrogen and progesterone. Then number two, there is stretching. The muscle fibers, they further elongate beyond 20 weeks of gestation due to the distension by the growing fetus. The walls become thinner and thinner. At terms, the thickness of wall is only 1.5 centimeter or less. So see, this is how, and initially there is hypertrophy. Initially there is increase in the muscle, the stretching, the hypertrophy, and later on the hyperplasia occurs. Now, how does the arrangement of muscle fibers in the uterus changes? See, the fibers, the muscle fibers, they are divided into three parts, or they can be differentiated as an outer mass, inner circular mass, and the intermediate mass. So outermost layer is a thin layer of longitudinally arranged smooth muscle fibers, which follows a hood-like arrangement over the fundus. And this hood-like arrangement is also responsible at term for the descent and the expulsion of fetus when the contractions start. Now, the inner circular layer, it is very, very scanty layer, and it is spatially organized around the sphincters, like around the tubal orifices and the internal orifices or the internal os. So this inner circular layer, which has got sphincter-like action, is mainly responsible for the maintenance of pregnancy. It maintains the sphincter, or it keeps the internal os tightly closed for the maintenance of pregnancy. The intermediate layer, which is the thickest of all and strongest of all, here the muscle fibers are arranged in a crisscross fashion. See, the muscles in the intermediate layer are having a double curve. So whenever they contract, they form a figure of 8. And the blood vessels, the spiral arterioles, they run through this intermediate layer. So whenever the contraction of uterus occurs, especially following the delivery, they are responsible for the control of blood loss. And that is why this layer is also known as living ligature of the uterus. So this is the diagrammatic representation of the arrangement of muscle fibers in the uterus in the three layers: the outer longitudinal layer, the intermediate crisscross layer, and the inner circular layers around the orifice, especially around the tubes and around the internal os. Now, what happens to the contractility of the uterus? During early pregnancy, the uterus contracts irregularly, and these may be perceived as mild cramps by the patient. And when we do the per-vaginal examination in the very early pregnancies, especially around the 6 to 8 weeks, these contractions of the uterus can be palpated through the fornices, especially in the lateral fornices. And this is known as Hager's sign. In the second trimester, these contractions become slightly more advanced and more frequent. But then at that time, they are known as Braxton Hicks contractions. But what is the character? How they can be differentiated from true labor pains or false labor pains? So these Braxton Hicks contractions are sporadic, infrequent, and the intrauterine pressure is only 5 to 25 millimeters of mercury. But near term, these contractions only become more frequent, more rhythmic, and more regular. And they are responsible for some discomfort and account for the false labor pains. And as the pregnancy advances further towards the term, these contractions become more regular in intensity, frequency, and duration, and then they become true labor pains. So there is a regular contractile activity of the uterine musculature all throughout the pregnancy, and depending upon the intensity of this contractility, there may be abortion if the contractility is too high, or the sphincteric action of the muscle is weak. So they may be responsible for early spontaneous abortions, or they may be responsible for preterm labor or more frequent false labors in the pregnancy. Now, what happens to uteroplacental blood flow? See, one thing is that uteroplacental blood flow is basically measured by the Doppler studies. The delivery of the most of the substances which are essential for the fetus and the placental growth, metabolism, and the removal of waste requires placental intervillous spaces to be adequately perfused with the blood. From where does this blood comes? So this blood basically comes from the uterine vessels. In the non-pregnant uterus, the uterine blood flow is only 50 to 45 ml per minute, but this flow becomes 450 ml per minute in the midterm, in the middle of the second trimester, and this flow becomes 500 to 750 ml per minute by the end of term pregnancy. So see the increase in the amount of blood flow. The blood flow increases proportionally to the fourth power of the radius of the vessels. So basically there is an increase in the diameter of all the vessels which are supplying the blood to the uterus and the placenta. So there is increase in the diameter, that is why there is increase in the blood flow. The placental perfusion basically depends upon the total uterine flow. So this is how the blood flow increases. The relaxin and certain other adipocytokinins which are present over there, they augment this uteroplacental blood flow. Now, what are these adipocytokinins? We'll talk about that. Is chimerin, which is an adipocytokinin which is secreted mainly by the placenta, and this serves to increase the human umbilical nitric oxide activity, which mediates the greater amount of blood flow through the uterine and the placental vessels. Then there are other adipocytokinins like visafactin, which increases the vascular endothelial growth factor, and this vascular endothelial growth factor receptor 2 expression in human epithelial cells, which are derived from the placental amnion. Then the other adipocytokinin include leptin, resitin, or adiponectin, which all enhance the human umbilical vein endothelial cell proliferation. Certain microRNA species like microRNA 17 to 92 or microRNA 34, they are important in spiral artery remodeling and invasions. Abnormalities of these microRNAs function have been reported in preeclampsia, fetal growth restrictions, and gestational diabetes. So this is a tabular differentiation of the normal pregnancy and PIH in the uterine blood flow. I think I have already discussed about this, so I will not repeat it. This is just to to complete the presentation. Now, what are the changes in the cervix which occur in pregnancy? There is a marked hypertrophy and hyperplasia of the elastic and the connective tissues. The vascularity is increased and there is softening of the cervix, which is also known as Goodell sign. Now, when we do practical examination of the uterus, a non-pregnant cervix feels like a cartilage, whereas the pregnant cervix feels like a lips. So it becomes lip-like soft consistency, and this is known as Goodell sign. Then there's eversion of the cervix or ectropy. Now what is this? So normally the squamocolumnar junction lies inside the endocervical canal. What happens in pregnancy? This junction, it comes to lie down on the ectocervix. So the exterior of the cervix looks red, congested, and looks like it is inflamed. So this is known as the eversion of the cervix or the ectropion. During pregnancy, the cervical canal is also closed by a thick tenacious mucus plug which is secreted under the effect of progesterone. But what happened at the time of labor? At the time of labor, when the progesterone is withdrawn, the cervix dilates and there is release of this mucus plug along with the blood. This is known as show, and this is a definitive sign of true labor. Now, this is a pictorial representation of how does a pregnant cervix looks like. See how congested reddish it is looking, almost like a strawberry. The changes in the ovary. there is presence of theca lutein. See what happens normally during the menstrual cycles. There are multiple follicles which are developing, but only one follicle reaches the maturation. Then this follicle, this rupture of this follicle, then the ovulation occurs. The egg is released. This is fertilized by the sperm, and the pregnancy occurs. Now, what happens to the rest of the follicles which are developing? They become spontaneously they regress. But what can happen in pregnancy? They develop into theca lutein cyst. Now, why this cyst? These are basically benign ovarian lesions, which they reflect the exaggerated physiological follicle stimulation, which is also known as hyperreactive luteinalis. Basically, why does this happen? See, there is a hormone beta HCG which is released by the placenta up to 12 weeks of pregnancy. This hormone is similar to luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. This hormone is basically responsible for the overgrowth of these normal follicles or the development of this bilateral theca lutein cyst. So whatever are the conditions where this beta HCG levels are higher than normal, like in molar pregnancy, twin pregnancy, or choriocarcinoma, these theca lutein cysts are more frequently found. And placentomegaly, again, because the mass of the placenta is more, so obviously the beta HCG unit is more. So again, there are theca lutein cysts like in diabetes or in Rh isomerization. And in hyperthyroidism or preeclampsia also, these beta HCG levels are very high, and there is presence of this theca lutein cyst. Ovulation ceases during pregnancy and the maturation of new follicles is suspended. So what happens to the mature follicle which has ruptured and has released the egg for the pregnancy? This ruptured follicle transforms into corpus luteum. This corpus luteum functions maximally during the first 6 to 7 weeks of pregnancy, and it continues to function by the end of 12 weeks. By that time, the placenta has also started to develop, and it gradually takes over the function of corpus luteum. So then also there is an extrauterine decidual reaction on the surface of ovarian just beneath the ovarian surface, which is commonly seen in pregnancy. Then there is hormone relaxin, which is a protein hormone secreted by the corpus luteum, the decidua and the placenta, in a pattern similar to that of the human chorionic gonadotropin. So what is the meaning? So basically, the way the HCG is secreted by the placenta, in the similar fashion, the relaxin is also secreted by the placenta in the pregnancy. This hormone is basically, this aids in many maternal physiological adaptations, such as remodeling of the reproductive tract, connective tissue to accommodate labor. Relaxin also appears important in initiating the augmented renal hemodynamics, lowering the seminal osmolality, and increasing the arterial compliance. Now, what happens to fallopian tubes? The total length of fallopian tubes is increased, the tubes become more congested, and the muscles undergo hypertrophy. What are the vaginal changes? The vaginal walls become more hypertrophied, edematous, and more vascular. Is the increased supply of the venous plexus surrounding the walls, giving the bluish coloration or blue hue to the mucosa of vagina and the cervix. And this is appreciated at Chadwick's sign. When we do per speculum examination in a pregnant woman, the vagina appears very blue in color. This is Chadwick's sign. The pH of the vagina becomes acidic, that is 3.5 to 6. This results from increased production of lactic acid by the Dodderling's bacilli, which are normally present in the vagina. So because of this acidic pH, the candida grows in the vagina of the pregnant woman. And this is the common cause of vaginitis in pregnancy in most of the Indian population. What are the changes in the breast? Is increase in the size of breast, is marked hypertrophy and proliferation of the ducts under the effect of the estrogens and progesterone. The vascularity is increased. The nipples become more large, erectile, and deeply pigmented. The sebaceous gland, more 5 to 15 in number, are there, which become hypertrophied, especially around the areola, and this is known as Montgomery tubercles. More details about the breast changes and the hormonal effects under which these effects occur will be discussed in the subsequent part 2 of this session. So this is a pictorial representation of the breast changes. You see the non-pregnant breast, the nipple and the areola in the early pregnancy and in the late pregnancy, and in very, very late pregnancy around the delivery. This is the picture of a breast. But what are the changes in the skin, cutaneous changes? The face typically acquires a mask-like appearance known as pregnancy mask or chloasma gravidarum. Now, what is this chloasma gravidarum? Under the effect of hormone progesterone, there's a lot of melanin pigment which is released, and this pigment is basically concentrated around the cheeks, on the bridge of the nose, on the aloe of the nose, on the upper lips, on the forehead. So basically, when you imagine, it is a mask-like around the eyelids. So an extreme form of pigmentation around the cheeks, forehead, and around the eyes, known as chloasma gravidarum, typical of pregnancy. And this is also very, very depressing for a female. See, pregnancy is something, it's a period to enjoy. But when these kind of changes occur on the skin, on this face, on the abdomen, then the female becomes stressed and she comes to a doctor. What has happened to me? So the reassuring, see, when we know that these are normal changes and these changes will revert back to normal after the delivery, only then we can reassure the women that don't worry, this is normal, right? And it is the indirect indicator of normal progesterone in the pregnancy, these changes. Now, what happens on the abdomen is development of linea nigra, a brownish black pigmented area in the midline, stretching from the zip sternum to the pubic symphysis, but more marked from the umbilicus to the pubic symphysis. So on the lower abdomen, this linea nigra, there is a black, dark pigmented vertical line in the midline, which is known as linea nigra. Then there is presence of stria gravidarum. Now, what is the stria gravidarum? Because of the distension of the abdomen by the growing uterus, the skin becomes stretched, and this subcutaneous, there is break of the subcutaneous tissues and the capillaries and the, small hemorrhages, which appear as a slightly depressed linear marks underneath the skin of varying length. This is known as stria gravidarum. They are pinkish in color. Now, what happens following delivery? Following delivery, this pinkish linear, depressions in the lower abdomen, they become, whitish or grayish in color. Then this is known as stria albicantis. And these stretch marks are partially permanent. Some of the marks disappear, but some of the marks may disappear. So again, you have to counsel the women about the presence of these marks. They'll keep coming to you why these marks has occurred, what will happen. So you have to counsel. There are a lot of commercially available stretch creams or stretch nail oils available, like bio oils available, which are actually of no true benefit to the women. But just to counsel them, just to make them more happy, you can still advise them these kind of products which are commercially available in the market. Now, so this is again just a pictorial representation of the different skin changes. You can see the this chloasma or the pregnancy mask appearance in picture number 1, and these stria are there. Then there are there's a lot of itching is there on the abdomen, and there's this nevi, skin nevi are there, vascular spiders and skin nevi. Now, weight gain in pregnancy. See, there's a lot of extracellular fluid accommodation in the pregnancy. Then there's a fetus approximately 2.5 to 3 kilograms. An average fetus in a normal pregnant woman will weigh 2.5 to 3 kilograms. Plus there is placenta. Then there is a lot of liquor. So everything in the pregnancy, it contributes to weight gain in pregnancy. So how much weight gain is there? So on an average, a singleton primary gravida will gain 10 to 12 kilograms of weight in the pregnancy. On an average, 11 kilogram weight gain in pregnancy is considered to be normal. And there's a net weight gain of 5 to 6 kilograms. The rest of the weight gain is basically attributed to the temporary weight gain by the fetus and the placenta and the liquor, which is basically immediately shed off as soon as the patient delivers. Now, this weight gain in the pregnancy is basically divided into trimesters. This first trimester, second trimester, and third trimester. And the weight gain in the pregnancy is also dependent upon the BMI. So the patients with a low BMI or more BMI will gain different amount of weight in the different trimesters of pregnancy. So there is an increase of approximately 12.5 kilograms of weight at term. The main increases occurs in second half of pregnancy, approximately 0.5 kilograms per week. In the initial 16 to 24 weeks, the weight gain is 0.3 kilograms per week. In the second half of pregnancy, the weight gain is 0.5 kilograms per week. In the first trimester, there may not be any weight gain because of the nausea, vomiting, and decreased appetite. So they may be on an average 1 kilogram of weight gain in the first trimester, and there is an average 3 to 5 kilograms of weight gain in second and third trimester. That amounts to 1 plus 5 plus 5 is almost 11 kilograms, and which varies. And this is a distribution of weight to the each part. The breast weighs 0.5 kilograms, placenta is 0.7 kilograms, uterus is 1.6 kilograms. As I've already told you, the baby is on an average weighing 3.5 kilograms. The liquor is weighing 1 to 1.5 kilograms. And there's an extracellular blood volume or the fluid which weighs, just a minute, which weighs approximately 4 kilograms. So total weight gain is 11 to 16 kilograms. Average is 11 to 16, 12.5 kilograms. So there are marked variations. Now come to the physiological changes. So I'll be discussing each organ system in detail. First, I'll be talking about the hematopoietic system. So hematological changes in pregnancy, the blood volume increases by 40 to 45%, and the blood volume increases maximum by the end of mid-trimester. Then there's increase in the plasma volume. That is, there's a 40% increase in the plasma volume, and there's a 20% increase in the RBC volume. See, this is a difference in the increase. The plasma volume increases by 40%, the RBC volume increases by 20%. So what is the impact of this? So there's hemodilution. So there's physiological anemia, but this physiological anemia is never less than 11 gram%. So that is the crux of the story. There is hemodilution, there is increase in RBC volume, there is increase in plasma volume, there is increase in hemoglobin content also, but there is decrease in the hemoglobin concentration because there is relative hemodilution. But this hemodilution also has got beneficial effect. What is the benefit of this hemodilution? The viscosity of blood decreases. So there is more free flow of blood from the mother to the fetus. For the free flow of the blood from the mother to fetus, this hemodilution is beneficial, number one. Number two, pregnancy is a hypercoagulable state. So if the blood also becomes thick, then this hypercoagulability impact will increase and there will be macrocoagulation. So this hemodilution basically helps in preventing the clotting or the coagulation or the blockage of the vessels. So this hemodilution is basically beneficial in pregnancy. Now, what are the parameters which decrease in pregnancy? So this decrease in the viscosity of blood, the packed cell volume decreases, and the hematocrit also falls. There is moderate hyperplasia in the bone marrow, and the reticulocyte count increases slightly during pregnancy. These changes are almost certainly related to the elevated maternal erythropoietin levels. And there is increase in the hemoglobin mass. So what is the result of this increase in the hemoglobin mass? The increased oxygen carrying capacity of the blood. Because this change is also very, very important. If the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood will not increase, how will the mother's blood will be able to supply the oxygen required for the fetus? So the increase in the HB mass is very, very important. But the actual hemoglobin concentration falls. This is basically because of the hemodilution. Then there's increase in the plasma proteins. But again, the plasma protein concentration will decrease. So there's actual increase in iron mass, actual increase in hemoglobin mass, there's actual increase in RBC mass and protein mass, but their concentrations will fall. There's increase in the globulin. There is both type of globulins, sex hormone binding globulins and thyroid binding globulins, both will increase. But there is a fall in the free thyroid hormone levels, and there are fall in free sex hormones in the circulation. But the levels of albumins will decrease. So the normal AG ratio, which is 1.7:1, in the pregnancy it becomes 1:1. Right? And this basically change in the AG ratio is responsible for hyperproteinemia of pregnancy and the pedal edema. The pedal edema, or which occurs in pregnancy. So there is basically physiological hyperproteinemia in pregnancy because of relative hemodilution and relative increase in the plasma than the proteins. Now, what are the immunological changes? Pregnancy is an immunocompromised state. The humoral immunity increases and the cell-mediated immunity decreases. There is a shift of the T helper cells from T1 to T2, right? So what happens? With suppression of T helper cells 1, there is an upregulation of T helper cell 2, which increases the secretion of interleukins 4, interleukin 10, interleukin 13. And there is a decrease in interleukin 2, interferons, and tumor tissue necrotic factor. So these are all the diseases which are mediated by T helper cells. 2 types will flare up during pregnancy. So there is a flaring up of SLE. Clear to all? And all the diseases which are mediated by T helper cells, one types will improve. So there's improvement in Hashimoto's thyroiditis, the improvement in multiple sclerosis, and there's improvement in this rheumatoid arthritis. So all the pains, all the joint pains which are present before pregnancy will suddenly disappear in pregnancy, and the woman will become very, very happy. Now, what happens to WBC count? So WBC count will increase during pregnancy up to 15,000 per cubic millimeters. In the postpartum, the WBC count may increase to as much as 25,000. There is also change in the DLC. So WBC, that is the white blood cell count, will increase, but there is a relative change in the different cell type series. So what happens? There is increase in the neutrophils, there is increase in the T types lymphocytes, but the B types lymphocytes will remain unchanged. The monocytes will decrease. Was my screen not visible earlier? Because I just saw a prop on my screen. The students can see the screen now. Anybody who can respond?
Yeah, Vinita, your screen is nicely seen.
And am I audible, clearly audible?
Yes, clearly audible, and very good lecture going on.
Thank you very much. So just to repeat, in the DLC count also changes in the pregnancy. The neutrophils will increase, the T lymphocytes will increase, but the B lymphocytes will remain unchanged. But the monocytes level will decrease. So basically what happens, the CD4 to CD8 ratio will remain unchanged in pregnancy. Now what happens to the platelet counts? See, basically the platelet counts remain within normal range, but definitely they come down to the lower side of the normal range. So the normal platelet count in pregnancy is approximately 1 lakh per microliters. This is known as gestational thrombocytopenia. So there is a normal gestational thrombocytopenia in pregnancy in all uncomplicated pregnancies. Now what happens during pregnancy? There is a general downward drift in the platelet count, particularly during the last trimester. So the lower platelet concentrations are particularly basically because of the hemodilution. Also, the platelet consumption is increased, and this creates a greater proportion of younger and therefore larger platelets. So whenever you do a peripheral smear examination during pregnancy, you see more larger platelets and more younger series of platelets in the peripheral smear. So also there is splenic enlargement. There may be elements of hypersplenism in which the platelets are prematurely destroyed. So this is the cause of basically gestational thrombocytopenia. So why does the platelet counts fall in pregnancy? There is number one, there is hemodilution. Number two, there is hypersplenism, which causes the more sequestration of platelets into the spleen and more damage. So there is a relative thrombocytopenia in pregnancy, but they still remain within normal range. They never fall below 1.5 lakhs per microliters. Right? Clearly understood to all? Now, what happens to coagulation and fibrinolysis? Pregnancy is a hypercoagulable state. All sorts of coagulation factors are increased in pregnancy except factor 11 and 13. But the fibrinolytic activity decreases. So anticoagulant protein C and S also decreases. So whenever you do BT and CT and antithrombin time in pregnancy, they remain unchanged, right? Now, very, very important, the cardiovascular changes. The causes of maximum mortality in pregnancy because of the various medical conditions like anemia, heart disease, or pulmonary edema, or preeclampsia, etc. are basically because of these cardiovascular changes in pregnancy. Now, we will discuss these changes. Now, what happens to the position and size of heart? See, whenever there is a fetus inside the uterus, the diaphragm is shifted upwards. So because of this elevation of diaphragm, the heart moves to left and upward with the apex shifting laterally. So whenever you are doing a palpation or the inspection of the chest and looking for the apex beat, the normal position of apex beat is shifted laterally. So never get confused. It is a normal
yes,
Sir, any confusion? Am I not clearly audible?
No, ma'am. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Carry on, Vinita. There was little disturbance from some other student. Carry on.
Now, normally your X-ray in pregnancy is not done It is contraindicated in early pregnancy. Whenever there is a must necessity in pregnancy to get a chest X-ray done, it can be done with the abdominal sheath. But just to complete the theoretical part of presentation, if by chance chest X-ray is done in pregnancy, but how will the heart look like in pregnancy? So that the cardiac silhouette will become larger and more horizontal. The straightening of the left upper cardiac border, and there is a small benign pericardial infusion. So if somebody, if you get an X-ray chest done for a pregnant woman and you give it to a physician and you don't tell him that this is an X-ray of a pregnant woman, he will give a pathological picture that this patient may be having some cardiac problem. So, writing the clinical history that it is the X-ray of a pregnant woman is very, very important. Otherwise, there will be misinterpretation of the results. Now, what happens to ECG? When you get an ECG done in a pregnant woman, the heart rate is increased. There is tachycardia. And there is an increase of 15 beats per minute on an average from a non-pregnant woman. The heart rate in a pregnant woman is, in a non-pregnant woman, the heart rate is on an average 72 to 90. So in a pregnant woman, it is 15 beats more than that. So that is also known as sinus tachycardia. Then there is a slight left axis deviation in the ECG. There's a Q waves in leads 2, 3, and AVF. There's a flattening or inverted T waves in leads 3 and V1 to V3. Now, what happens to heart sounds? When you hear heart sounds by auscultation using a stethoscope, what will you observe? The S1 will be loud, more wide, and more prominently split. S2 will be absolutely normal, and S3 will be easily heard. What happens to murmurs? The most common murmur in pregnancy is ejection systolic murmur of grade 3/6. In 20% of the patients, you may hear a soft systolic murmur over the cardiac area. In 10% of the women, you may hear a continuous murmur. And this is basically because of hyperdynamic circulation, which occurs in pregnancy, which I just told you, that the blood volume increases by 40 to 45% in pregnancy. Clear? But what happens in an echo? If you get an echo done in a pregnancy, what will you see? So there's a slightly increased end diastolic and end systolic volume. There's a slightly improved left ventricular function. There's a slightly increased ventricular dimensions with spherical left ventricular remodeling. There's a small pericardial infusion, which you can also see on an X-ray chest. There's an increased tricuspid annulus diameter. The physiological tricuspid regurgitation is also seen. There's no change in the septal thickness or the ejection fraction. Now, what happens to the cardiac function? So most important, cardiac output. The cardiac output in pregnancy increases tremendously. The cardiac output is the result of stroke volume and heart rate. As I have just told you, that heart rate increases by 15 beats per minute. And the increase in heart rate may be much more because of some pain stimulus when the patient goes in labor. So can you imagine the number, how does the cardiac output multiplies with increase in the heart rate? So the cardiac output, it begins to basically increase by 5 weeks of pregnancy. Sir, I'll just take this call. Okay. So the cardiac output, it begins to increase from 5 weeks onward, but the maximum cardiac output increases between 28 to 32 weeks. And there's a 40% increase in the cardiac output. And this increase is further amplified at the time of delivery and immediate postpartum. Now, why this cardiac output increase at the time of delivery and postpartum? Because immediately following the delivery of the fetus, the pressure on the IVC and the pressure on the aorta is released. So the preload on the heart increases. The lot of blood is going back to heart. And because of this increase in the preload, the output also starts increasing. And the heart is not able to, manage this much of work, which is given to heart, immediately following delivery. So the heart goes into failure immediately in the postpartum period, especially in the compromised heart, in disease conditions like heart disease, anemia, preeclampsia, diabetes, in all those conditions, when the heart is not strong enough to compensate for these, sudden increase in the preload because of following the delivery, there's a lot of ingush of blood from the placental sinuses to the maternal circulation. there's a lot of load on the heart. So this cardiac output further increases, but not able to cope up with the required amount. So there's a heart failure. So now overall maximum increase in the cardiac output occurs in the postpartum period, 70 periods. And in the second stage of labor, the cardiac output increases by 50%. And in the late first stage of labor, owing to the pain stimuli, and because of the increase in the heart rate, that there is increase in the cardiac output, and then at 28 to 32 weeks. So these 4 periods of gestation, immediate postpartum, second stage of labor, late first stage of labor, and 28 to 32 weeks of pregnancies are 4 periods in the entire pregnancy which are most detrimental to a maternal health if the cardiac output failure occurs. Right? Because these are the time when the preload on the heart is maximum and the heart is not able to cope up with the required amount of work it is been destined to do. Now, what all parameters decrease in pregnancy? So there is a decrease in the peripheral vascular resistance, and there is a decrease in the pulmonary vascular resistance. And both these changes, in spite of the increase in the cardiac output, the blood pressure remains either normal or it falls, especially in the first trimester of pregnancy. There's a fall in the systolic blood pressure, there's a fall in the diastolic blood pressure, there's a fall in the mean arterial pressure. The maximum decrease in this blood pressure occurs mainly in the second trimester, right? Now, what are the factors or what are the changes in the cardiac vascular system which remain unchanged in pregnancy? So the JVP, jugular venous pressure, or the central venous pressure, and the ejection fraction, these 2 things remain unchanged in the pregnancy. So what are the indications of heart disease during pregnancy? When we have discussed about the normal changes, so how do we see? So how do we diagnose a heart disease? Say there are normal, so many changes in the heart cardiovascular system, which will mimic a normal or abnormal heart. So how do you diagnose a heart disease in pregnancy? So the symptoms are clubbing, cyanosis, paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea, orthopnea, or pulmonary edema. Then increased JVP. As I said, JVP in pregnancy remains not affected. So whenever the JVP is increased in pregnancy, that means something is not right. Then, as I said, S2 remains normal in pregnancy. So a loud S2 or a prominent split in S2 is an indicator of a heart disease. Then presence of S4. Normally, fourth heart sound is never heard. But if you hear a S4, it is indicative of heart disease. Then presence of ejection systolic murmur more than 3/6, or a diastolic murmur, or a chest X-ray showing a marked cardiomegaly, or any arrhythmia in pregnancy. All these changes, if you observe in pregnancy, may be an indicator of a heart disease. Otherwise, a lot of changes in pregnancy, maybe simulus, or you may be just a false indicator of a heart disease. So a little word about the supine hypotension syndrome. Now what happens, as you know, when the uterus is growing, the fetus is growing, when they're lying down position, there's a pressure on the IVC. So most of the venous return to the heart is prevented. The blood flow to the heart is reduced. IVP is compressed. So resulting in a decreased cardiac output. Now what happens? So although in most of the women, they never become overly hypotensive when lying supine due to the opening of collateral channels. But in sometimes when the collateral channels fail to open up in 10% of the women may feel dizzy, lightheaded, or tachypneic or syncopal. So this is known as supine hypotension syndrome, right? So cardiac output basically increases by 1.2 liters per minute. That is 20% when a woman moves from supine to left lateral position. So always the women are advised not to get up suddenly from a supine position. Always turn to left lateral. Preferable position in pregnancy is always left lateral position. So if the woman lies in a supine position, the venous return will decrease. The aortic compression will decrease. So preload on heart will decrease. So cardiac output will decrease. So there will be reduced perfusion of the tissues to the entire organ system, including the fetus. So the mothers, and it will result in IUGR. So the mother are advised to lie in a left lateral position in a pregnant state. Clear? Now this is just a diagrammatic representation of the effect on the venous pressure. So the venous pressure or the venous blood flow remains unchanged in the upper body parts because there is no compression of the venous system in the upper body part. But it is significantly increased venous compression of the venous system in lower extremities, resulting in especially in the supine position or a sitting or a standing position, which returns to absolutely normal in a lateral recumbent position. So there is a development of this edema or development of varicose veins or development of hemorrhoids in pregnancy. More so in supine position, followed by sitting, followed by standing. Clear to all? I hope I'm not going too fast. It is my nature to go a little
Vinita, you are
fast.
going at the normal speed.
Okay, thank you, Shashi. Thank you for your feedback. Now, what happens to the respiratory system? See, the uterus, the fetus is growing inside the abdomen, inside the uterus in abdomen. So definitely the diaphragm is pushed upwards. So the breathing becomes diaphragmatic in pregnancy. Then the entire breathing in the pregnancy is more diaphragmatic. The uterus is pushed by the uterus pushes the diaphragm by 4 centimeters. So this results in a decrease in the residual volume and decrease in the expiratory reserve volume, that is ERV. But the transverse diameter of the chest increases by 2 centimeters. So when there is a decrease in the vertical diameter of chest, but the lateral or the transverse diameter increases. So overall respiratory reserve remains same. The tidal volume increases and the minute ventilation increases. The circumference of chest increases by 6 centimeters. And the subcostal angle also increases by almost 40 degrees. In a non-pregnant woman, the angle is 68.5 degrees. When in pregnancy, it becomes 103.5 degrees. So you can have a pictorial, visual impression. What happens to chest? See, in a non-pregnant woman, there is a vertical diameter of the vertical dimension. Whereas in a pregnancy, it becomes more laterally spread. And the subcostal angle increases in pregnancy, right? There is a progressive increase in oxygen consumption, which is basically caused by increased metabolic needs of the mother and the fetus. The mucosa of the nasopharynx also becomes hyperemic and edematous. There is a state of hyperventilation all throughout the pregnancy, leading to the increase in tidal volume. But then the woman always feels short of breath. But functional residual capacity decreases, inspiratory capacity increases, but the total lung capacity remains unchanged, which I shortly told you earlier also, because the actual size of the lungs does not decreases. The vertical dimension decreases, but lateral dimensions increase. So the total lung capacity remains unchanged, or it may be only decrease very slightly, that too only near term. The parameters which remain normal in pregnancy are this total lung capacity, respiratory rate, maximum breathing capacity, vital capacity, and inspiratory reserve volume. So all these parameters will remain unchanged. It is the expiratory reserve volume or the tidal volume which are decreased, but the total lung capacity will remain same. That is also, this is very, very important to maintain the normal oxygenation to the fetus. So again, this is a graphical representation of various changes in the respiratory system which occurs in pregnancy. This diagram is basically taken from the Williams. These are standard textbooks which a student is supposed to be quoting in the exams. So this is a change in the respiratory system. What happens to the acid-base equilibrium? The increased respiratory effort during pregnancy and in turn reduction is increased respiratory effort in the pregnancy, which in turn causes reduction in the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. There is likely induced in large part of the progesterone, which acts centrally and lowers the threshold and increases the sensitivity of the chemoreflex response to carbon dioxide. There is a compensatory respiratory alkalosis. There is a plasma bicarbonate levels decrease to 22. Is a decrease in the plasma bicarbonate levels, and the pH of the plasma increases. This increase in plasma causes an increase in the 2,3-diphosphoglycerate. There is a shifting of the curve from back to right. Right. So there is a shifting in the oxygen dissociation. That is, the oxygen, in more simpler words, the release of oxygen from hemoglobin becomes more faster and more easier. This is known as Bohr's effect. And this is a beneficial effect for the mother. If the oxygen remains attached to the hemoglobin for a longer period of time, then the baby will not get sufficient oxygen. So this attachment or the affinity of the hemoglobin to oxygen decreases. And this helps in releasing more oxygen to the fetus. That is, oxygen releasing capacity increases. So this is a change in the acid-base equilibrium. Now, what happens to the GI tract? Is increased salivation, that is known as tylism. The saliva, the more amount of liquid watery fluid comes in the mouth. The taste is often altered very early in pregnancy because of change in the taste buds. The increased appetite and the thirst. Because of that, the frequent small snacks are advised. Now the gums become hyperemic, they soften, and they bleed more easily. This is localized vascular swelling known as epulis of the pregnancy. What is heartburn? That is reflux esophagitis. Due to the relaxation of the cardiac sphincter under the effect of progesterone and relaxin, there is more reflux or regurgitation of food into the esophagus. This causes more frequent heartburns in pregnancy. Then the vomiting in pregnancy is known as emesis gravidarum. See, normal term for vomiting in pregnancy is emesis gravidarum. The students, whenever they are taking the history in the examination, there is no hyperemesis gravidarum. Hyperemesis gravidarum is abnormal. Hyperemesis is abnormal vomiting in pregnancies, whereas emesis gravidarum is normal vomiting of pregnancies. Right? So normal, or the correct term, is emesis gravidarum. It is not hyperemesis gravidarum. Then there's morning sickness. That is, there's a little amount of nausea or vomiting in early pregnancy in the early morning. Whenever the person gets up from the bed in the morning, there is some sickness. The nausea is there. Then there's decreased gastric acidity, which basically interferes with the absorption of iron. There's constipation because of the reduced gut mobility, also under the effect of progesterone, and the increased absorption of water and salt by the intestines under the effect of progesterone. The hemorrhoids are more common in pregnancy because of the elevated venous pressure by the compression of enlarging uterus. Now, what happens in the liver? The size of liver remains unchanged. There is the synthesis of albumin, plasma globulin, and fibrinogen from the liver. The total hepatic synthesis of globulin increases, which is basically stimulated by the estrogen hormone. The hepatic, arterial, and portal venous flow also increases. All the liver enzymes, they decrease in pregnancy, except serum alkaline phosphatase, which increases, which is basically synthesized by liver and placenta. So any presence of raised SGOT or SGPT or in pregnancy is an indicator of some disease. Doubling the amount of SGOT or SGPT in pregnancy or AST, ALT in pregnancy is an indicator of severity of hypertensive disorder of pregnancy. Otherwise, they remain normal. There is no increase in the liver enzymes except alkaline phosphatase. Now, gallbladder. So gallbladder size increases and it empties more slowly. That is responsible for more, bilious vomiting early in the morning because gallbladder remains filled with the bile. The progesterone potentially impairs gallbladder contraction by inhibiting the cholecystokinin-mediated smooth muscle stimulation, which is the primary regulator of gallbladder contractions. The relaxation of gallbladder increases the tendency of stone formation. So basically what happens in pregnancy, most of the dormant stones, the stones which are, lying, sleeping in the non-pregnant stage, they become, they suddenly awake. And there's more epigastric pain because of stones. Then you do ultrasound in pregnancy and you find a stone. So the maximum diagnosis of stones or gallbladder stone is there in pregnancy. So cholecystitis of pregnancy is also almost physiological condition, and it may turn to a gallbladder stone formation in severe extremes of cases.
Dr. Vinita?
Yes.
We have 7 more minutes left.
Just 2-3 more slides.
Yeah, please leave.
Secretion of bile remains unchanged in pregnancy. Then the urinary changes. The size of kidneys increases by 1 centimeter. There is hydronephrosis because of the pressure on the ureters by the enlarging uterus. There is increase in the glomerular filtration rate. 25% GFR increases by second week, and the increase becomes almost 50% by end of second trimester. And the 80% increase in the effective renal plasma flow before the end of first trimester. So what happens to renal function because of all these changes? The serum creatinine levels decline from 0.7 to 0.5. But even levels more than 0.9 milligram per dl in pregnancy are therefore considered to be abnormal. And normally, normal serum creatinine in a non-pregnant woman, 0.5 is normal. But in pregnancy, more than 0.5, 0.9 milligram serum creatinine is abnormal, right? There's 30% higher creatinine clearance in pregnancy. So glucosuria also becomes more common in pregnancy because of increased GFR. The increased GFR together with impaired tubular reabsorptive capacity for filtered glucose accounts for most of the cases of glucosuria. Proteinuria also becomes more common in pregnancy because of again increased GFR and increased renal plasma flow. So this is because basically the changes in the kidney are basically because of relaxin hormone, which I'll be discussing in detail in my session 2 as the time is less. So I will just skip this slide. Now what happens to bladder? This increased frequency of micturition, especially noticed at 6 to 8 weeks of pregnancy, usually subsides by 12 weeks. Now why this happens? Because the enlarged uterus in the first trimester remains a pelvic organ and it is basically compressing upon the bladder. So there is increased frequency of micturition. What happens in the second trimester? It becomes an abdominal organ. So the bladder is released from the pressure by the enlarging uterus. So there is the frequency of micturition becomes normal in the second trimester. In late pregnancy, the frequency of micturition again reappears. Now why this happens? Because was the engagement of head. The head has gone down into the pelvis. So again, because the head is compressing upon the bladder, so again, frequency reappears. Then there is stress incontinence, which is absorbed in the late pregnancy due to the urethral sphincter weakness. Now, so what are the changes in pregnancy? The bladder pressure increases from 8 to 20 centimeters to almost 220 centimeters. The bladder capacity decreases, bladder congestion increases, the urethral pressure increases, and length of the urethra increases. What happens to ureter? There is dilatation of the ureters due to the compression. There is unequal dilatation of the ureters because of the cushioning effect by the sigmoid colon. So the right ureter dilates more as compared to the left one because of the this causes the dextrorotation of the uterus. So the left ureter is more protected as compared to the right one. Okay. Then there's atony of the ureteric muscles, which is basically caused by the progesterone. Then there's vesico-ureteric reflex under the increased pressure of the uterus on the ureters. So the changes in the ureter in pregnancy basically lead to urinary stasis and pyelitis. So that is why the UTIs and the renal infections are more common in pregnancy because of the stasis, the dilatation and relaxation of the smooth muscles of the ureter and the bladder. Now, what happens to the pituitary glands? I think we can skip it because we will discuss in the hormonal changes in the pregnancy and changes in the thyroid and the parathyroid glands also. We can skip. Now, what happens to nervous system? The temperamental changes are found during pregnancy and in the puerperia. Nausea, vomiting, and the mental irritability and sleeplessness are probably due to some psychological background which may be associated with the pregnancy. Postpartum blues, depressions, or psychosis may develop in a susceptible individual. Carpal tunnel syndrome. This is the compression of median nerve underneath the carpal ligament over the wrist joint, leading to pain and paresthesia of the hands and arms, which may appear in the later months of pregnancy. So that is the end of the presentation. I have just skipped the endocrine changes just because I'm going to discuss these changes in my session, part 2 of this session. If you still want to discuss, I can discuss it, or I get the command from my colleagues or the moderator, I can, if the time you allow me the time, I can discuss.
Yeah, thank you, Vinita. It was an excellent deliberation. You made the maternal physiological changes in pregnancy very easy. But I can't see any question in the chat box, so we are still having 2 minutes, so you can show your thyroid.
I want to share one thing here with my students, if those who have joined, that most of the times, the basics of obstetrics and gynecologists are always overlooked by the students. They feel that it is not important, but you definitely get long questions, at least one long question from basics in ops. There are 4 papers for the DNB students. In all 4 papers, you get one question from the basics, and you always get a lot of questions in the Viva, and you also get a lot of multiple MCQs in your NEET PG also. So you must not forget to read and understand the basics of anatomy or physiology or basics of obs and gynae. It is a very, very important topic, most often overlooked, but most important to understand the entire obstetrics and gynecology. You will spend months and months understanding preeclampsia, hypertensive disease, or gestational diabetes, but you will not understand unless until you understand the normal physiological changes of pregnancy, especially the anemia. Anemia can be best understood by only when you know the normal physiological changes in the hematological system or the cardiovascular system.
So basically the basic sciences, anatomy and physiology is basic. So you students may find it boring, but to tell you one thing, if you know it properly, and you revise it again and again, then the understanding of the subject will become very easy later on. I can see one message in chat box: physiological cardiac changes exacerbate with multiple pregnancy. Dr. Vinita?
Yes, they do.
Yes,
the physiological cardiac changes, they do exhibit with the pregnancy. Normally, there is a 40 to 50% increase in the cardiac output, or there is a 40% increase in the increase in the heart rate by 15%. But definitely, this multiple pregnancies causes more compression of the IVC and more compression of the aorta. So again, the preload is further reduced, and there is decreased cardiac output. But with the increase in the, but there is more chances of failure of the heart in any medical or pathological conditions. So these changes are definitely exhibited.
Yes. So now we can, time's up, and now we can conclude. It was a very excellent lecture, Dr. Vinita, and I request the students to join our next webinar next Tuesday at 3:30 p.m. It will be on internal generative organs, and please do attend. Though anatomy and physiology classes may be boring, but they are the form, they are the basis of your whole career of obs and gynae. Do you agree, Vinita?
Yes, definitely. And also I want to add that, there's better learning by listening than reading.
Yes, listening and reading and then again revising.
Listening repeatedly adds on to your knowledge, makes things more easier. Reading is very, very boring. Nowadays, it is an era of listening. So so try to listen as much as possible.
So
every time you gain 1 or 2%, whatever you listen. So by the end of your 3 years of your DNB, you will you would have definitely retained 40 to 50% of what you have heard your entire life in many lectures, in many forums.
So with this, I give my sincere thanks to Anbai organizers who gave us this opportunity to organize this webinar. And thank you all dear students for attending this. Thank you, Dr. Vinita.
Thank you, Dr. Shashi. Thank you very much. Thank you, organizers. Thank you.
Thank you,
ma'am.